What's up, gnarly dudes?
Well, we agreed to culture, not necessarily the language. That was very uninspired and horrific.
What's up, 80's people?
What's up, 80's people?
Welcome to Lawfully Chaotic, Season 2, Episode 33.
And I think Urkel was the 90s, right?
Yeah, Urkel was the 90s, yeah.
Urkel was the 90s for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, shit. It's so funny that we decided to talk about 80s culture this week. Two things happened to me that was kind of weird. One,
you're not even going to let me finish the hello.
No. Hold on. This is funnier.
Hello, welcome to episode 33. Go.
So, have you ever gotten what you call the I can't sleeps? Like you're just lying there in bed and you're like, everybody else is asleep around you and you just fucking hate everybody because they're sleeping and you're not, right? So I'm tossing and turning. I got the I can't sleeps. So of course I gotta go to doom scroll YouTube. I gotta go, okay, let's see what's going on in the YouTube verse that will help me fall asleep, which is ironic because all it does is piss you off and keep you awake. But eventually you're so beat down, you fall asleep, and there you have it. You fall asleep, right? So
I do the same thing quite often, and I hate myself for it.
I have to take a shower afterwards. So I start doom scrolling malls that are closing. And there's a whole series of people out there that travel the country and do these like little 10, 15-minute bits about all these famous malls that are closing. And it was so ironic because I'm like, oh, I know that mall. I remember that mall. And I'm like, uh-oh, I'm suckling at the nostalgia nipple, and I'm not sure I should be doing that, So I was like,
well, let me ask you a question.
It's an 80s culture conversation.
Yeah, totally.
You know what I mean?
Let's start out at the mall. You want to go to the mall, bro?
No, that's where the fucking arcade was.
Let me ask you a question, though. I remember. Well, first, let me ask you a question.
Uh-oh, here it comes.
Other than your own local mall, is it a specific mall? Like, I can't name another mall, maybe, except for like, there's
iconic malls, man.
Well, there's the Mall of America in Minneapolis. What's the one? The Grove. I mean,
so
but like, I remember
the most famous mall ever.
Which is that?
Puente Hills Mall.
I've never heard of it.
You know why it's the most famous mall ever?
Why?
It's where they filmed Back to the Future.
Oh, Twin Pines.
Yeah.
See, I didn't know
it's
that.
An actual mall.
Okay.
It's currently in the process of dying. It's probably already a corpse.
Well, they're all dying.
I'd seen the video of the corpse mall, But
I guess my question, like, I can't name any other mall than my local Fox Valley Mall in Aurora, Illinois, where we hung out.
Yeah, but what are there, like 3 people in Illinois? I mean, that kind of makes sense.
Dude.
There's at least 8 malls within 12 miles of where I used to live.
See, for me, it's more of, it didn't matter what the mall is. They're all pretty much the damn same. It was the experience.
Yeah.
Like, so I remember like Walden
Books.
The
quality of the Orange Julius. It was the
tinderbox
of the hot dog on a stick crew.
You remember? So I remember the Walden books. We used to go there for D&D books.
Yep. I remember
Tinderbox, which was a smoke shop, but they had all
Walden
kinds
books
of
is where I used to get all my D&D books sometimes because they go
same.
on sale for virtually nothing.
Same. Tinderbox, which was a smoke shop, had all kinds of cool like pewter chess sets and
then it became a hookup dating app.
That's right.
Dropbox is just Tinder.
That's right. What else? Babbage's was a computer store we had out here.
Oh, Babbage's.
Gary,
God.
Thank you for joining us. Dixie Square Mall, the one they trashed for the Blues Bros.
I don't remember that mall, but it makes sense that it was in the Brews Brothers.
The Brew Brothers. Gary, where else did we hang out? Babbage's, Walden Books, Tinderbox. Forgot where else we used to go, but yeah, that's so funny that you brought that up. That is like what could be more 80s than the mall?
And what really shocked me, the other part that shocked me, is this particular episode of this guy's show I was watching. I can't even remember the name of his show.
Mm-hmm.
It was called the East Vale Fox Mall or something in Philadelphia, I think.
Okay.
and I hope I'm not getting that wrong, but he was wandering through this mall. They had sunk $77 million in it right before COVID. So it's an unfinished project.
Wow.
So it's all super clean and really nice, but it's dead. I mean, it's officially shuttering, I think, at the end of this year is what he was saying. So it's like, you know, when we start talking about our 80s theme and our 80s culture, that kind of like our arcade culture, our first run at these very rudimentary, you know, console culture related to 80s culture. And then of course the, you know, watching ET and mainstreaming D&D for the first time in the 80s through a very, you know, popular movie.
Mm-hmm.
I began to realize that my fascination with Star Wars, Star Trek, and all the 80s culture things really were a derivative of my fascination with playing, you know, tabletop role games. You know,
Totally.
everything.
Absolutely.
Everything that I did was
of that
influenced
make believe and that fantasy. Absolutely.
The 80s wasn't, well, malls were.
No, I'm saying the make believe and
fantasy,
fantasy of tabletop role playing games.
You know, we played Gangbusters, and you know, and we'd have some
Boot Hill.
Yeah, Boot Hill. I think zombies really epitomize 80s culture. I think they really got going in the 80s, but they didn't mainstream.
See, there I'm going to disagree with you.
Oh, you don't know good zombies till you watch really shitty 80s zombies movies, man.
Well, yeah, I don't think zombies was very mainstream back then. I'd say
not mainstream. I think 80s culture really gave it a little bit more animus, you know?
Sure.
A little bit more.
I would say vampires maybe more so with Lost Boys.
Yeah, well, yeah, Lost Boys popularity I think really helped the whole Vampire the Masquerade and Werewolf and all that was definitely benefiting from that whole sequence of events. Again, I think 80s culture is definitely the first kind of environment where a lot of things got tied together, because a lot of people in business were experimenting with the idea of linking all those things together and see if they can make money at it. And boy, howdy, when they made ET, proof that they could make money at anything. Like, they literally built a video game called ET that was so bad you couldn't win it, and everybody knew it who developed it.
I remember that game. It was,
but everybody bought it when it first came out. But as soon as word got out about how shitty it was, there's still, you know, turning landfill piles. And I think the most famous story, they found 20,000 copies rotting in a landfill down in Texas somewhere.
That's hilarious. That's so funny.
So funny.
I remember, you know, it's funny that you also brought up arcades, because we were just talking about, Gary and I and Matt, Jeff, and one of our other guys, one of our other D&D guys, we're just talking about it on our Slack channel today. Ours was called Galaxy World, and it was a bowling alley / huge arcade. And then I remember, you know, all the old classics, Tempest and Centipede and the sit-down X-Wing vector graphics game, and Tron and Defender, Robotron, all that shit. And then, you know, it's cool to see how, like, Dragon's Lair pops into my mind. Yeah. Right? Remember how groundbreaking that was? Even though as a game, it sucked. To watch somebody play it, it was amazing. Fantastic. Yeah. Gauntlet was one of our favorites. You remember Gauntlet?
Gauntlet was a good one. I like Gauntlet a lot. Yeah. What was also interesting, I distinctly remember Saturdays. They finally Galaga. Yep, that's Galaga. Yep. I finally distinctly remember on Saturday they started showing an arcade competition game where these kids would play arcade games as a competition. The show was only a half hour.
Oh my God, it was esports fucking 30 years ago.
Yeah.
40 really years ago. Holy shit.
I'll have to look that up, because I used to save recordings of audio recordings of it, because I like to listen to the commentary about the games. It was a horrible show. I mean,
yeah, but somebody was way ahead of their time. That's crazy. That is really nuts. This whole show, by the way, tonight is nobody's gonna give a shit about it except for you and me and maybe like 3 other people who are here in chat. And it's really just gonna be a walk down memory lane. We're not gonna actually review any games.
Right.
Although I'm sure you remember this one.
Starcade. It was called Starcade.
Okay, Starcade.
And it came out in the 80s. And oh my God, I've actually met the host of this years ago. And I cannot for the life of me. Oh, let me.
What was the dance show? That reminds me of Starcade. That reminds me of the dance show that was.
Oh, Golden something. Golden Dancers or
something way the hell back then.
I was almost going to say Golden Showers, but that feels inappropriate.
No, that was on the scrambled HBO channels. You remember this game?
So Starcade was an 80s show that pitted contestants against each other in timed arcade game competition. Came out. It was canceled in '84. It was created by James Caruso and Mavis E. Marther.
Jesus
God,
Christ.
what was the name of the dude that hosted it? Because he was semi-famous game host. But the reason why I loved it is their very first game they played on there was Super Zaxxon.
Oh God, yeah.
And burgers. Solid Gold. That's what
Solid Gold. Thank you, Gary. Yeah. Solid Gold. The Solid Gold Dancers.
That was pretty awful. It's funny. Yeah. It's interesting to look back on our 80s, origins. But to be honest with you, it's like comparing the times of, are you okay with getting cholera or do you like modern medicine? I'm like, I love modern medicine, so I'm okay with the 80s being in the past. I'm perfectly fine with the 80s. Don't get me wrong. Yeah, there's nostalgia and then there's visiting your past. I'm just visiting my past today. I do not believe in the nostalgia disease for me at all.
Oh, see, nostalgia is big for me, but you are right, because it can I don't know. Nostalgia is something very comforting for most people, but I think it works both ways. I think it can also make you very depressed because you pine for those old days.
You're lost in your head.
So you calling it nostalgia disease? I'm not actually.
Well, that's not new. That's not a new thought. I mean, there were psychologists. Yeah. There were actual psychologists in the 50s, 60s, 70s that would diagnose people with nostalgia. And they referred to nostalgia as a type of mental illness.
No shit.
Yeah, it was a real thing back in the day. Absolutely. And then when it was realized, no, don't ignore the leg warmers. I mean, if that's all she's wearing, if that's all she or he is wearing, then go for it.
We can't get into fashion, otherwise we'll be here all night. Breaking out of the arcade, you remember this one? Just to stay on topic a little bit. We really have no set path for the discussion tonight.
I found this at a garage sale about a year and a half ago.
It's on eBay for like $45.
Yeah. No, I found it. I used to play this game all the time. Like I used to play Dark Tower solo, and I would pull this game out and play it like all the time.
I remember owning this one. You remember this one? I remember owning this too.
That one I don't remember.
Oh yeah, I had that. It was, I mean, as you can see, it was like 3 buttons, and it was this just horrendous little LCD display.
And I'm guessing it was a dungeon that you went through?
Yeah, it was like, it was literally like, do you move or do you shoot? You fall in a pit and die.
Fall pit, everybody dies.
Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah, and it's really interesting because, like, I can remember being, 10, 11, 12 years old and getting the groups together for D&D, and as much as I enjoyed the D&D game itself, it was interesting, all the little cultural things around this that we did in the process of getting ready to play that D&D game. The food culture, the the kind of entertainment culture that was influencing us, and all the things around us that we didn't even really care all that much about, but because it was part of our world, it somehow would sometimes bleed into our D&D games. Like I was convinced that all heroes were Captain Kirk, right? That was like the model citizen that I thought you were supposed to build in your worlds, right? That early generation of playing D&D where everybody's heroes. There weren't anything. I mean, some people were starting to dabble with Dark Sun, but Dark Sun came out late 80s, early 90s. Late 70s, early 80s, we were all kind of very tropey in our understanding of, and we were surrounded by media culture of the 80s to kind of reinforce that trope.
I think back then it wasn't tropey. Back then it was just the evolution of how that.
I just don't think they knew that that's what tropey meant yet.
Exactly right. That's my point. Now it's tropey as hell. Back then that was the purpose of the game. You're right. I mean, these are heroes. You're not a bad guy.
You're not an anti-hero. Run.
Yeah. Yeah, we used to. So we used to sleep over at my buddy's house like almost every weekend and play. That's how big of a nerd I really am. Play role playing games. And then we had. I mean, and we've talked about some of the games we played back then. It was obviously D&D. It was BattleTech. It was Shadowrun. It was we played Marvel superheroes. We played a little bit of Torg. We played I don't know. I think we played Gamma World. We played. I mean, it was just everything. We tried everything, and it's funny because Champions. That's that one. You're right. Thank you. Champions, GURPS, Car Wars.
We were playing Indiana Jones. We were playing Gangbusters, Star Frontiers.
Yeah.
We were playing, anything that could be turned into a role-playing game or a TTRPG. We were playing it.
Yep.
I hadn't discovered
Top Secret.
Yeah, Top Secret. Yep, that one was a lot of fun. But we hadn't really discovered the overpriced world of tabletop war games, right?
BattleTech. BattleTech was the closest.
Yeah, but that was affordable. That wasn't out. That was still very affordable to play. It wasn't too crazy. I hadn't discovered Warhammer yet, even though it'd been around for a while. I hadn't really discovered 40K because that was all running through the Citadel project as well as the Rogue Trooper tournament or whatever they used to run.
Rogue Trader, yeah.
Rogue Trader.
I still have the original Rogue Trader rule book. It's actually titled Rogue Trader.
That's crazy. It's nutters. But our first introduction to the idea of just how grandiose you could make your D&D game was the D&D battle system that came out in the late 80s. I'm not familiar with that. I have a intact copy of it over there on my library shelf.
Really?
Yeah, it came out with a giant foam castle. So like this 4-tower keep, and it came with a rule book, and it was called Battle System. And it was
Gary, you actually win tonight for first in chat.
But yeah, the D&D battle system, that was my first introduction to the idea of these grandiose battles, and I think it was because I was reading a lot of Dragonlance at the time.
Oh yeah.
And Dragonlance always did a really good job of these like major battles and this idea of this great war waging across this backdrop of the adventurers helping Rasslin find. Rasslin had his subquest, and the barbarian and the she was a cleric, but maybe I can't remember her name.
Hasselhoff was the rogue.
Yeah, but they were helping her get the discs of a god to her people so that she could help bring the gods back to Kryn. And eventually they were going to finally forge the famous dragon lance. That's the only Goldmoon. And finally forged the ancient dragon lances that could kill dragons in a single blow.
You know, I just had a good idea because we should just hire Gary as our producer.
Gary, I need
like
200 reference points stat.
Thank you, Gary. I barely remember. I mean, I remember the feeling of reading the Dragonlance books and the overall kind of story, but I don't remember any of the details. It was so long ago. I need to reread them. Actually.
The Forgotten Realms books were very influential on me. I spent a lot of time reading the Spellfire series and a lot of those Forgotten Realms series books that really did inspire a lot of the game content that I was trying to write and do.
Yeah.
But you know,
did you go ahead? No. I want you to finish.
I built a famous ranger out of MacGyver. So it felt like a good transition for an NPC character. So I took a ranger that just had this knack for building anything he wanted to make things work. And I built it along the idea of MacGyver because MacGyver was a lot of fun. It was a stupid show because none of the science was accurate, but it was fun idea. You know, it was a fun idea to think that maybe, just maybe, you know, that you could be that clever.
That's a cool idea. You know, it's funny because I think all through the 80s, and I'm not joking, I played a ranger. I was just fixated on the Aragorn stereotype of the mysterious guy in the corner,
Tannis
half elf,
from the Dragonlance. You know, there was. You're right. Aragorn was the other one.
Pretty much for me, it was Aragorn. I mean, Gary remembers. I never wanted to play a spellcaster because they were too squishy and I hated them. And I never wanted to be the upfront melee guy. I was always the sneaky guy with the bow. For a decade, I played a ranger.
So that was the other thing that happened while I was on the YouTubes last night. I saw a trailer for a movie that, what's his name is going to be in. Who's the actor in Barbie? What's his name?
Oh, Ryan Gosling.
Ryan Gosling. He's doing the Fall Guy.
I just saw that.
They could talk about a blast from the past. And we used to...
yeah, that was true. I'm
that
not
never
going in
stuck
there.
into anywhere. Yeah, it's so true. Yeah, I mean, we didn't have cantrips back then. That was always kind of weird.
Maybe that was also kind of wise because it's like, oh, great, I cast 5 spells, then I'm useless. That was probably
it was
back then.
Yeah.
And
but
now
the Fall Guy TV show.
Now, just as a slight aside, no matter what class I play, it's got to have some magic in it.
Yes. Well, and I think they did that on purpose because.
Yeah, but I saw that Fall Guy reboot. The brown, I think it was a GMC Sierra pickup truck, if I remember correctly from back then. Yeah, I fucking love that show.
And
Lee Majors.
And it just reminded me of how, you know, I'd use these shows as vantage points into making my home brews sometimes because I knew people like me were watching it.
Yep.
And so if I made it interesting, maybe they, you know, keep playing all the time.
Yeah. I think some of the movies, Heather Thomas.
Talk about the perfect hair. There was only one other person that had better hair than her, and that was Farrah Fawcett.
Oh, yeah.
But she was more of a 70s product.
Yeah.
But she had the hair, man.
I think for us, it wasn't so much, I'm sure inadvertently, the, you know, movies and TV that we watched, Shatner, TJ Hooker, and Adrian Zemed, William Shatner and Adrian Zemed.
Yeah.
I think for us, it was movies for us, and Gary, correct me if I'm wrong, movies for us kind of more dictated what we played at the time. You know, like something comes out that is sci-fi, and then we move over to BattleTech and just kind of we're in that mode. You know, a new fantasy comes out, we go back to D&D, you know, that type of thing. Yeah.
But disaster movies in the 80s were a thing. Remember that? Earthquake, which I think was late 70s, early 80s.
Yep. You remember Poseidon Adventure? That was late 70s, but yeah, exactly. After James Bond, we started Top Secret. Like,
that's exactly why we started playing Top Secret too. Was all the James Bond stuff was so much fun.
Yep.
Oh shit, man, that's funny.
BattleTech. Oh man, that would be awesome. Towering Inferno. Yes. Yeah, BattleTech. I'm still waiting for the fucking 40K live action movie. I have the animated one. I still have this love-hate relationship with 40K.
You do. I saw your post on Instagram. I was like, oh, that's
funny. all my destroyed fucking paints right here, hundreds of dollars of paint that's fucking useless, and every Vallejo rant cam on. Every one of my I haven't painted in months. Every one of these fucking tubes is still good. 90% of these pieces of shit fucking things are garbage.
Because they're all dried out?
Yeah, I'm really upset because I finally, last night, got the urge to paint minis again. And I'm going through my paints. I'm like, this is a fucking mess. It's ridiculous. So, anyway. But, Robotech.
Towering Inferno was a fun one. I really like that one. And, Robotech.
Oh, Aeromax. That's right, Gary. Good. Robotech. This wasn't really disaster. Remember the movie The Wraith with Charlie Sheen?
Yeah. And
he drove that weird Chrysler prototype car, and he couldn't die. He in the car were a ghost.
Well, I mean, Knight Rider
fucking movie. So
you got Knight Rider that came out.
No, it's not that it was a mess. By mess, I mean that all of this crap is fucking garbage. I mean, I could open this and nothing but medium would fall out, and all the pigment is stuck at the bottom. You could probably even see.
So are you saying their paint containers don't store well?
That's what I'm saying, Jason. These fucking paint pots, it's taken me this long to come to the conclusion. This is the worst fucking invention in the hobby. Oh my God. So anyway, now I got to decide if I want to try to revive them or which.
But Knight Rider, I mean, between Blue Thunder, Knight Rider, and the Wraith, we used to make some really interesting
Car Wars.
Car Wars, yeah.
Car Wars. We played tons of Car Wars.
And then, of course, the classic, Mad Max came out.
Oh yeah.
Once I saw Mad Max, we were taking Hot Wheels.
So did we.
We were taking Hot Wheels and we were just gluing shit onto it. It was so much fun.
I bet you, Airwolf and Blue Thunder. I bet you that I still probably have.
This is at the heart of the 80s culture, right there.
In my
companies creating planned obsolete products, including me.
Yeah, right.
Including me.
There you go. I mean, even okay. Fuck the paint thing. I'm over that. Yeah, Car Wars was awesome. Wait, see, I lost my train of thought. What were we saying? What did you say right after that?
Airwolf?
Oh, about gluing shit to Hot Wheels.
Oh yeah, gluing shit onto the Hot Wheels cars.
I did that. I mean, I bet that in my junk mini boxes of all my old pewter back from the fucking 80s, there's probably still a couple of Hot Wheels in there with some little armor plates and guns glued to them and shit. Car Wars was fucking awesome. Well, now I want to play all this old stuff again.
When we would go garage sailing, right?
Yeah.
There'd be a giant cardboard box filled with their kids' former Hot Wheels because back then I didn't understand collection values. Like I didn't know what collections were. It didn't make any sense.
None of us did.
There were people that were collecting stuff from the 40s and the 50s, but I wasn't exposed
comic books
to
and baseball cards.
Yeah, like I wasn't really exposed to what it meant to be a collector. But then there'd be another giant cardboard box where this old retired veteran would throw all of his spare plastic model parts. So all of his parts from his planes, his battleships, and all that would just wind up. And, he'd sell them all to me for like $1.
Yeah.
And then I'd buy like 3 dozen Hot Wheels cars for like $5. And I'd just go home and just take some really, really, really toxic JB Weld glue and just start.
I still have
putting shit on there, and those would be our cars.
I still have shit. I mean, look at this. I got fucking old original Warhammer, and then something newer. I've got a fucking engine block from
Yeah, but
something.
we've all come to the conclusion that you're a hoarder. So I don't know if you're really a collector.
I am. I have the bottom jaw of a Venom sculpt that I no longer know where it is. I mean, I have the lower air dam of a Ferrari 246. I mean,
but all those spare parts, what we didn't know then is what a lot of people use them for now. They do kit bashes, right? They kit bash all their spares that they have and build these really cool fucking models.
That's why I keep them. It used to drive my parents fucking crazy. Like, you're literally saving a box of garbage. And I'm like, no, this is gold. All right, funny story. When I was really young, 2nd grade, I put glue on my younger brother's forehead while he was sleeping. He woke up at 4 hours later, peeling glue up. I told him he was an adopted little... Oh, that's awesome. The spelling.
Yeah, the spelling. One's a 3-letter word, the other one's a word. I guess if you came and looked at my library, you know, which is only a snapshot of about 35, 40 years of gaming culture. Because I think, you know, like one of the things that really defined us was the arcade. Like, to me, the arcade was the definition of 80s culture.
Absolutely.
Which then
that was the discussion we had today on Slack. Yeah.
100%. Yeah. And I can remember the first time I went to an arcade. It was late 80s. And the pre-console wars were starting to take off, right? In the late 80s. You had Atari, you had ColecoVision and Television.
Did you own Pong?
Yeah, I owned Pong. That was like, I kind of remember having that when I was 7 or 8 at the late 70s.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that was the first home console video game was Pong.
I think that was invented by MIT, wasn't it?
I don't know, Gary.
I think it was. I think they developed it as an MIT game theory engine.
Okay.
That they would use in their MIT laboratories, and then someone got the bright idea of turning it into a gaming thing where, you know, you could sell it as an actual gaming thing.
Did Nolan Bushnell go to MIT? Did he have anything to do with that?
Possibly. Don't know.
The 2600. I consider the 2600 as the first.
No, I consider the 2400 the first game, the first console. That was before the paddle. The 2600 came with the paddle and a couple of the other
you're right.
upgrades.
No,
2400 was the original one.
Yeah. You can find an Atari 2400 with like 1,000 games and every fucking controller ever made for like $150.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the 2400 that really, I mean, that was the start of it. And do you remember like the first few games were Atari brand games, and they were obviously for the time they were great, but they very quickly became boring. And then do you remember when Activision started and came out with Pitfall and River Raiders?
So there were two very transitory events that happened that really shaped my relationship with arcades. One, our consoles became more affordable because of the competition factor, so people were buying them.
I got something to show you. Keep talking.
And two, arcade game, like arcades were trying to compete with the console revolution.
Yeah.
So our local arcade, when I lived in Long Beach, came up with the bright idea that, you know, if you come in between the hours of, you know, 6 o'clock and 9 o'clock, you could play all the games you want for like $20. And that to me was revolutionary. I just knew like every Thursday night I could go to the local arcade, pay $20, and then be in the arcade for 3 hours and
I thought
play all night long.
Somewhere I have Activision club patches for Pitfall and River Raid. Here's a 1984 Olympic patch.
Oh, that's funny.
Authentic.
You are a hoarder. There's no doubt in my mind. I don't have any of that goofy shit.
Used to be even a lot fucking worse. When I had my parents' basement to fucking fill up, and it didn't matter.
But yeah, I remember playing Joust for an hour, or I'd play
Joust was
Hubert for an hour, or Missile Command for an hour, or Tempest, and and the first games that came out on the 2400, Yar's Revenge. Holy shit, that's a really good reference, because Yar's Revenge was a complete knockoff of Galaga.
Yep.
That was it started the knockoff wars, and then it wasn't called there was one there was Dig Dug, but then there was a Dig Dug knockoff that you could play.
Yep.
There was Centipede, but then right next to it was Millipede.
Yep.
And it was just the knockoff wars started, the console wars started, and then Activision really was the shoehorn. Like, they were the ones that really figured out that the console was nothing more than the operating platform. The real trick was putting what you could into the game based on the availability of the platform. And they realized that the people making those platforms weren't game makers. They were really good at making these platforms, but they were horrible at making games, because Activision would swoop in and they released Pitfall and Frogger, which made all of the games Atari was working on look like shit.
Yeah.
They were the first color and animation and cutscenes.
They were the first game studio, specific game studio.
Yeah. And they introduced cutscenes and stuff like that, for the first time. Which... So the end of the 80s culture, I felt, was, to me, the wrap up of it was, I graduated from high school in 89.
So did I.
Right? And the last real mind-blowing movie I saw in 89 was The Nightmare Before Christmas. And I felt like everything that the 80s was wrapped up into that movie.
Nightmare Before Christmas?
Yeah.
The Tim Burton one?
Yeah. Because that came out in 93. So when I graduated high school in 89.
I thought it was later than that.
No, it came, look it up. We were just watching it last night. It came out in 1993. And to me, when I watched that movie, I left the 80s behind me, because that movie just had so much new ideas for me about things that were to come. I had, when I graduated high school, I bought my first mainstream Commodore Amiga 2000. I wasn't, doing TRS 80s anymore. Now it's accessories, DLC, micro gotcha. But it's interesting that, to me, I enjoyed watching the 90s culture too. I enjoyed the 90s culture. I had a lot of fun with it.
To me, I didn't dig the 90s culture very much in any way, to be honest. The music, I'm not saying I hated it, but it is definitely not one of my favorite.
Best music ever.
Wrong. Nope.
80s music used to make my teeth fall out. It was so bad.
Well,
80s music was horrible.
No,
terrible. Worst music ever.
Are you serious?
The only good 80s music that ever came out was punk. That's it. Okay. There was no other good 80s music.
I got nothing to say to you anymore. Thank you for joining us for our last episode of Lawfully Chaotic.
That's all it takes to get you pissed off, is to tell the truth. That's awesome.
90s music better than 80s?
Technically late 90s, early 2000 music was definitely the best. 80s music had a good punk scene, had an excellent punk scene.
See, now, if anything, I would have at least said that early 90s grunge music was okay. Late 90s is probably the worst era for music ever.
No, you got all that alternative rock that came out in the late 90s.
That was early 90s.
No, man. Early 90s was still transitional 80s kind of pump, what do they call it? Bubblegum music, like new wave. New wave was still kind of like what we were talking about earlier, all that synth shit.
Yeah.
I always think of like Flock of Seagulls as the kind of quintessential typical 80s vibe.
Sure.
Men at Work. But when I talk about the like transitory punk, I'm thinking of like, David Bowie, but David Bowie was popular in the 70s and the 80s, but the 80s was just a better entertainment medium for Bowie. They've been interviewing Talking Heads
Air Supply
a lot today.
That's Air Supply is 80s.
Is
Talking
it?
Heads is 80s. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
But
I don't know, man. I think they were all starter bands in the late 80s and they became mainstream in the early 90s. And I think once again, it's that it's difficult. Are you part of the garage band culture? Like 80s was a great garage band culture for sure. Like the 80s had, like, you could go into a neighborhood and there's a punk group playing in their driveway, surrounded by a mosh pit of people just going ape shit and having a good old time, which is kind of how Offspring got its start. The Offspring got their start as a garage
in California. That shit didn't happen in the Midwest.
Yeah, well, it's because you guys don't have real weather. You have that awful shit that falls out of the sky and freezes.
We don't have real weather or real culture.
Well, yeah, you have an amazing cheese culture.
Great. Not even us. That's Wisconsin. Can we at least agree that fashion?
Yes. Oh my God, we used to do this all the time, or see it happen all the time.
Wait. What is that?
So you'd have these kids walk in the neighborhood jamming. Yeah, Green Day was the 90s, I believe.
It was, yeah.
Yeah.
we have hot
dogs.
Can we at least agree that fashion in the 90s was just ungodly?
I mean, I think the 90s were far more interesting in fashion than the 80s. The 80s fashion was horrible. It was like everybody was colorblind, and they were convinced that wearing clothes twice your size somehow made you look fashionable.
Was just blah. Okay, now we're getting off topic here.
No, we're not, because all these things influenced our. So all of the 80s, like all the 80s cultures and the comparable culture topics, they defined who we hung out with.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
And who we hung out with is who we gamed with.
Yeah.
Nowadays that's not always true.
Right.
You tend to game with people who just enjoy gaming. But we have hot dogs.
Oh, who, Green Day? Yeah, the popularity in the 90s. You're right.
Yeah. But I mean, once again, like, I'm still shocked at looking at all my 80s culture heroes, and they're all 20 years older than me. Yeah. And I'm like, when I felt, like Beastie Boys is a good example, right?
Well,
I fell in love with their
music.
That'll
never go out of style.
I fell in love with their music, but for some reason, my brain said that the reason why I fell in love with their music was because they were my age. But they weren't. When the Beastie Boys came out, they were like in their mid to late 20s.
Yeah, they were just out of
I
think they were just out of NYU and couldn't get jobs. And they're like, well, fuck it.
So here I am at 52 years old looking at a 65-year-old lead singer from the Beastie Boys going, wait a minute. I thought they were my age. This is fucked up.
It's the same thing with Kiss. See, when a bunch of bunch of lazy Jewish guys don't have anything else to do, they're like, oh, fuck it, let's form a band. You got Kiss and you got Beastie Boys.
And so and then, I mean, I remember the heartthrob, Duran Duran was like Depeche Mode, Duran Duran.
Simon Le Bon.
There was a core group of bands that were super mainstream in the 80s that kind of helped define a lot of that 80s.
Yeah, The Cure, Depeche Mode, Duran Duran.
But I think because we were gamer nerds, gamer nerds were not okay to be in the 80s. Like, you were a jock, or you were a soc, you were this specific type of niche that you were expected to be a part of, which, cliques, right? We called them cliques back then.
Well, nowadays, nerd has a very different meaning than it did back then.
Well, nerds and geeks argue who's more nerdier and who's more geekier. Like, a nerd doesn't want to be called a geek, and a geek doesn't want to be called a nerd. That's how weird it's gotten.
Back then, they all meant the same thing.
Correct.
Nerds, geeks, dorks, dweebs, spaz.
But I'm wondering if because we were already kind of in a... the term "soc" was derived from the Outsiders book and the movie. And that became a very popular, the greasers and the socias,
Mm-hmm.
us versus them culture
Yeah.
was kind of, spontaneous in the 80s at that point. There, but one of the things I loved about the 80s culture, I think the most, like what I really loved the most about the 80s culture is that because we were already gamer nerds, we were already looking for shit that other people wouldn't be looking for. You know what I mean? Like everybody else was eating at McDonald's, watching Price is Right.
Yeah.
Going to the movie, seeing that mainstream movie, going to the mall, like having those mainstream life events.
Mm-hmm.
I remember specifically not embracing any of that as my culture. I was always looking for garages to hang out with, kit bashing, gaming ideas, trying to find computer clubs that were kit bashing Commodore 64s before they became outdated, and mucking about with TRS 80s, and taking over arcades and finding like an arcade that only had like 10 games, but they were the 10 games that were super cheap for the guy to rent or buy.
Mm-hmm.
So no one had ever heard of them.
Yeah.
So we were playing games, arcade games that people were like, oh, I don't like. There was Star Force and Major Havoc, and there were all these weird games that no one was buying.
Never
but
heard
we'd
of them.
actively go and look for those games because we knew, and I think the last thing I remember, like the beginning of the 80s culture, because I mean, look, I graduated high school when I was in 89. I was 18 in 89, which means I was 9 in 1980.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So the beginning and the end of a cultural period.
Mm-hmm.
I remember e-tickets for Disneyland because I lived so close to Anaheim. Disneyland was a major part of my life.
Right.
And I remember e-tickets, and it's like watching Disneyland age over 40 years around me.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize how much my 80s culture was defining me at that time. Like I was all in for consumerism without realizing that's what it was. You know what I mean? It was like I was so tired of being poor because my mom was very poor, and I was tired of it.
Yeah.
So when I finally started living with my dad, he had more money. So for the first time in my life, I was exposed to all the consumerism of the 80s that began to define it for us, But now in my 50s, I'm 52. Like I said, I'm in my 50s.
Mm-hmm.
I have fallen out of love with stuff.
Says the guy sitting in front of all of that schmutz behind him.
Yeah, but this is really it. And
I'm joking. I'm joking.
No, I know, but it's a good point, because to me, all of this gets used in all my games. The days that I would just buy something for the sake of setting it somewhere, knowing that it existed, gave me joy. Those days are gone. I'm much more utilitarian now.
Unfortunately, I am still in that mode. I don't think I'll ever get out of that mode. Yeah. It's a collection thing, It's just like,
I mean, I like to do retro collections for the purposes of getting my hands off on lore and content that's not digitized. Like there's a lot of 80s and 90s TTRPG stuff and RPG stuff that's not digitized. That's been lost to time. So I do spend a lot of time trying to collect as much of that retro history as I can, because that I do enjoy collecting.
Yeah, but that's a different sort of collecting. That's true collecting. Like I want this because it doesn't exist anywhere else and it means something. A lot of the and I do a lot of that too, but I also do a lot of the shit of like, I'll start collecting, X. And
I think a really good
and they go up on the wall, and I look at them, and as I come up to my office, and it gives me a few seconds of joy, and then it's like out of my fucking mind for
right.
Yeah,
kind of like your giant stack of Zombicide that
Well, I mean that's playable as a game. I just don't have anybody to fucking play it with me, because my wife and son hate board games.
Well, it took me a while to find. Yeah. It took me a while to find and be with my muse. I mean, luckily she's as nerdy as I am when it comes to gaming. So, she's always wanting to play board games and
Well,
play
I'm
D&D.
hoping I'm hoping my son eventually gets it. He's played D&D a couple times and he's liked it, but he's still too much into Minecraft and Roblox.
Yeah, and what's ironic about that is like the king of 8-bit and 16-bit gaming was the 80s. Everything in the early 80s was all 8-bit and 16-bit.
Right? And now you've got ultimate ray tracing and graphics.
Oh my god!
And they're playing fucking 8-bit fucking Minecraft.
I don't know if they're still open. I'd have to go check. But down in Temecula, one of the bigger cities near me, there in the old town Temecula, they opened up a brew pub called 8-bit.
Oh, man.
And basically all the beers were named after 80s arcade games.
Okay. Do they have arcade games?
And they had 8-bit and 16-bit arcade games in there as well.
Okay, when I visit you, we're going there.
I hope it's still open because a lot of these places were open about a year and then COVID hit.
There's a place out here. I'm pretty certain it's still open. We were just talking about it yesterday, the arcade. It's called Galloping Ghost, and it's out by us. And the guy's got a pretty decent collection of old arcade games, and they charge by the hour. It's like you can play, all the games are just set to, push start, and you just pay by time.
Which that makes sense.
Pretty brilliant, actually.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Okay, real quick. Okay. Favorite 80s role-playing game.
Favorite 80s role-playing game.
Favorite 80s role-playing game, not including D&D.
I would have to say it's a toss-up between Gangbusters and Star Frontiers for me. Gangbusters, because I really even as a kid, I was a huge history buff. And Gangbusters was really a window into 1920s gangland kind of theme. Mm-hmm. But I was such a Star Trek and Star Wars maniac. I really enjoyed Star Frontiers because TSR Studios put out Star Frontiers. So I was familiar with the writing style, but it was nothing like D&D. They introduced a whole new concept of playing a game. So I'd have to say Star Frontiers was probably my favorite non-D&D 80s game that I played.
All right. For me, it's Shadowrun, which we all know.
Yeah.
Favorite 80s tabletop war game?
Oof. I would honestly have to say it would be a game that somebody did on their own at a local game shop where they taught me how to play tabletop World War II games. Okay. So I came in to buy Raul Partha figures, and somebody was playing this World War II game on these 3 tables. And I'm like, what is this? He's like, well, come over and I'll show you. Couldn't tell you his name. Couldn't tell you what game we were playing. But that was my very first experience at a tabletop war game. My very first experience.
Okay. Mine is Battletech because we spent, our group, we spent so much time playing that.
To this day, I still don't consider Battletech a tabletop war game. I've never been able to think of it that way. To me, it's somewhere in between the two. I don't know why, but I used to play Battletech all the time. It just never felt like a tabletop war game to me.
Okay. We may have slightly different definitions of tabletop war game. I consider it a tabletop war game. So for me, it was Battletech. Favorite 1980s board game?
Ooh, that's a good one. What's a good 1980s board game? Probably Payday. Either Payday or Life. Although Clue, it's got to be Clue, because Clue was you had to pay attention to that game. Yeah, and it's not a board game vibe, but it had a little bit of that kind of RPG-esque kind of vibe, which is what attracted me to it. So I'd have to say Clue.
I honestly don't know if I can answer that. Clue was a good one. I actually liked Monopoly. Life was good. I don't know that I can think of an 80s board game. Oh, no, I take that back. Stratego.
Yeah, that was a fun one.
I like Stratego.
And that was a fun board game because you never needed more than one other person to play. So 2 people could play that all night long. Risk. Would Risk be an 80s board game?
Yeah, Risk.
Yeah, Risk.
Actually,
definitely
you know
Risk.
what? I take it back. Risk.
Yeah, I think Risk. Risk. It's a toss-up for me between Risk and Clue.
Was that Axis and Allies didn't come out in the 80s, did it?
I think it might have.
I mean, if it did, then it was definitely Axis and Allies.
Uh, 81. Yeah, Axis and
Holy
Allies.
shit,
Yeah,
81? Okay,
81.
well, all right, then I take it back second time. Axis and Allies by far.
Yeah, because
for
the
me.
original Axis and Allies came out in 81 and was a Nova game design, so it wasn't mainstream yet. It
Okay.
became mainstream in 84 when Milton Bradley bought it.
Right. Okay.
And that's what I remember playing that game was in the mid 80s.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, for me, Axis and Allies for sure. Favorite 80s arcade game. Arcade, not console. Arcade.
Right, arcade game, Joust. I love that game.
Mine was the sit-down vector graphic X-Wing.
I love Star Wars. I didn't love it enough to play that horrible game.
Yeah, I did. I did.
Yeah, did anyone ever finish a game of Risk or did you just flip the board over?
Gary, I have no idea who you're talking about. Favorite 80s console game.
Ooh, in television. Well, favorite 80s
not platform. Not platform game. It could be on any.
I loved Excite Bike. I love playing Excite Bike. That was so much fun.
Mine is a toss-up between. Oh, wait a minute. Actually, no, it's not a toss-up. Castlevania.
I couldn't get through the light
Actually,
flickers.
you know, it is a toss-up. It's between Castlevania and Metroid. And
Metroid's another one. I couldn't stare at the light flickers for that long.
Yeah.
Like the flickering transitional screens, it was like, oh, this is killing me.
It's those. It's a toss-up between those two. I might have to. I enjoyed playing Metroid more. It was a deeper story, but the genre of Castlevania appealed to me more. Although Ghosts and Goblins was a very close second, third. See, did we ever? We stayed up one night. We forced Gary to play Ghosts and Goblins, and we stayed up till 5 o'clock in the fucking morning watching him win that game. He's like, anybody else would play it? Like, no, keep going.
What was your favorite 1980s console platform that came out at the time? Because there's 3 of them that I remember playing as a kid before the Sega Genesis came out. And I'm not even sure if the Sega Genesis was 80s or 90s now that I think about it. But
I'm not positive.
I played on Atari platform. I played on Intellivision. And I think I'd have to say ColecoVision was my
I never
favorite.
owned a ColecoVision or an Intellivision, but I played them. I hated the Intellivision. I couldn't stand those controllers. That disc.
Oh yeah, well that's because they had too many fail points.
Yeah. Was the first PlayStation, that was 90s, right? I'm pretty sure that was 90s.
Hold on, I'm pulling up the list right now.
Because
Sega SG-1000 came out in 1983. Then there was Nintendo Game Boy in 89.
Yeah, PlayStation 1 was 94.
There was the Atari 7800 that came out in 86. And that was always so fascinating. That was always so fascinating about the Atari platform. As soon as Activision got popular, suddenly the platforms got better and better and better and better because Atari wasn't making games anymore. They were letting other people make games.
Right.
Oh my God. Do you remember TurboGrafx?
Yes.
You remember TurboGrafx?
I do.
There was the Sega Master System in 85.
I remember that.
Sega Genesis was 88. That was my last console I bought before I switched to PCs and started getting heavy into the computer gaming spectrum. So yeah, the 16-bit Sega Genesis.
I guess
1988.
I didn't have a lot of. See, my buddy always had the consoles. I didn't have a lot of consoles in the 80s. It was
the number one gaming platform was the Nintendo NES 1983. The very first time it came out was 1983.
That might be mine too. Yeah. Because
that's when we got introduced to Metroid and Legend of Zelda.
Yep.
And that Legend of Zelda broke all of the records.
Oh
It
yeah.
broke everything.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Broke it all.
Yeah. Okay, so we agree on that one. Favorite 80s computer game.
Oh, I used to play it for hours and hours. The very first, did it come out in the 80s? There were two. There was The Crown, and it was called The Crown and something, which I really liked. But I'm trying to remember if Sid Meier's very first Civil War game was my first introduction to
Civilization.
No. It wasn't
Civil
Civ.
War?
It was actually a Civil War game. Sid Meier's.
I think mine was probably Car Wars. There was an early version of Car Wars that I liked.
Sid Meier's. Where is it? Sid Meier's Gettysburg.
Okay.
Came out. No, that one came out in '97. So there was another game came out called The Crown and something, and it's killing me. It came out on Amiga. Came out on the Commodore Amiga.
So the first Car Wars game came out in '81 for the T199/4.
Zork. That was the other one. I fell in love with Zork. Yeah, I used to play that for hours. Bard's Tale. There was Bard's Tale.
Bard's Tale was good. Yeah, that's right.
I remember. Let's see. What was the other one? I got my main list up here. I want to look at because I'm sure it's in here. Oh, good Lord. Whatever.
The next one's going to be really tough, so it's going to be top 3.
Yeah, there's Bard's Tale, Castle Wolfenstein.
Oh, Wolfenstein was good.
The very first flight simulator 1.0 that came out.
Yep.
That was a lot of fun. And then there was, where is it?
Wolfenstein was good.
Oh yeah, it was Sim City.
Yeah, I never got into Sim City.
I remember playing way too much Sim City when it came out. Oh, the other one that was good, Populous. I remember.
Yeah, I didn't get into that either.
Then there was Dungeon Master. And where's that last one that I really, really enjoyed playing? And then there was the Leisure Suit Larry series. That was a lot of fun to play.
Yeah,
Leisure Suit Larry.
Yeah.
That was a lot of fun. It was my first intro to like adult style gaming.
First intro to sleaze.
yeah, it kind of was.
Hey, I kind of like this.
Yeah.
Okay. Favorite, and it doesn't have to be in order. Okay, but 3 of your favorite 80s movies. I think we're going to differ a lot here.
I know did Star Wars come out in the 80s? It did, right? Early 80s?
Empire did. Empire Strikes Back was 84 or 83. I think 84.
Because...
83.
Because Star Wars was what, 77, 78?
77, 83, and then 89. So you got
So I
Jedi
definitely have
Empire.
to say Empire Strikes Back is on my list.
Yes.
For sure.
Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yep. Raiders of the Lost Ark is on my list. I'm trying to think because I didn't have a lot of money in the early 80s. It wasn't until the mid 80s, late 80s, I started going to the movies.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm trying to think back in the 80s, what freaking movies were we going and go see?
I know. I'm trying. I want to say Lost Boys, but I'm kind of feeling. Was Goonies 80s?
Yes.
Probably Goonies would be
80s,
third. Yeah.
Goonies would definitely be third for me.
Back to the Future. See, this is too tough, man.
Yeah, well, but the problem I had with Back to the Future was it just wasn't a genre I enjoyed. Like modern sci-fi with time travel was very much its own genre.
Yeah.
But Goonies was a huge storytelling genre for me.
Yes.
Empire Strikes Back was just a continuation
of
the sci-fi world.
The thing I loved about Goonies is that it had a very Dungeons and Dragons party campaign.
So did
feel.
Raiders of the Lost Ark. I mean, Raiders of the Lost Ark to me was quintessential D&D. And Empire Strikes Back was an orchestra. It was an opera. Somebody was finally telling the story that we wanted.
Wait, Flash. Oh, Flat. Okay, I thought you were actually remember Flash Gordon. Although I think that was 70s. I think that was 70s.
No, I think that was early 80s. That might be
Was
early
it?
80s. Luckily, we have this cool thing called Google that tells us this shit.
Oh, 1980. You're right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a 1980 film. I think that began that entertainment drama of camp
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
forced media entertainment because there were so many cameos in that movie.
Yeah.
You know, and it just was forced on you. And it was such an awful movie that later on you began to realize just how entertaining it was, even though it was awful.
Yeah.
You know?
The
Hawkmen were terrible.
Oh my God. I
They're
mean,
the worst.
the movie is horrendous.
Like, they were Eric Cochrans.
Yeah.
They were the worst improvisational
Yeah.
Eric Cochrans. You could literally see the wires.
I know.
When they would do those dives and the Hawkman leader go, Hawkman, dive! And it was like he was taking a shit. And like, it was horrible, but
now
you can't help
watch that again.
Right? You can't help but stare at it and
Timothy Dalton. Timothy Dalton was in that.
Yeah.
I think he was probably, in relation to now, I think he was probably the biggest name in that.
Well, I mean,
not at the time, but
the James Bond series really helped him with that as well.
Oh God, he was the worst James Bond,
wasn't he? Though
in history,
but I don't know about history.
I think he was the absolute worst James Bond. Period. But that's another topic. So yeah, I think I'd have to say, Empire Strikes Back, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Goonies for me.
And I think that all sums up the 80s culture experience, which was the constant consuming of media. Like I felt like the 80s generation was the first generation that really consumed a lot of media in different formats on a regular basis.
Well, the VCR.
We didn't really have good cell phones yet. Those arrived in the late 80s. No. We had the shoebox phone. But obviously we didn't have smartphones. But we carried around little portable LCD games we could play. We had first generation consoles.
Yeah. But we had VCRs. So to your point, we had VCRs and home consoles. So the movie theater and the arcade came into our homes.
Yeah.
So
and
that
we stopped going to the arcade by the end of the 80s and early 90s.
And that's why, as kids, all we heard for that whole decade was you're going to rot your brain in front of the TV.
Yeah.
Whether it's playing a game or watching.
I never heard that because my parents were at home. TV was my third parent.
Oh, well, okay.
So I never had to worry about that. Yeah. Like, they would leave and go, don't forget your favorite channel. I'm like, oh, okay. And I go,
wait, which one of the
9-year-old ass in front of the TV, and watch my shows.
And
I got a response from your contact over at Daggerheart. And I filled out the survey to hopefully get in the test gaming queue. Nice. But the fact that it came directly from him was kind of nice because it at least let me know that, I was, in the thought process of all the game testing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I was, I filled it out. So we'll see. I'm also on the Darrington Press Discord. So they were announcing it there as well, obviously.
Unfortunately, that board game that I was working on for them, it didn't test well enough to move ahead. They were pretty deep into production and they killed it, unfortunately. I thought it was a really cute, clever idea. Matt and Marisha came up with that idea at their wedding.
I think it's a lot safer to say to make an $80,000 flop than a $12 million flop.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like,
you've
got to have, I know we're going to be off next Thursday, but I feel like our last show, which is going to be in 2 weeks for the year before we come back in 2024.
Correct.
But I feel like we could either cover Dark Tower because I think that helps us talk about 80s culture being rebooted in a more modern culture. But I think we could also talk a little bit about game testing and because I really think Dark Tower is a really good example of an old 80s game from Milton Bradley that went away, came back in a Kickstarter format, and was very well tested and well received. And all sorts of generations are playing it again in a very different way. And it's considered a very good cooperative board game to play now. Like it's got a lot of good reviews.
And I'll tell you an interesting aspect of it is that you use an app on the phone to play. That is your
Yep.
opponent. So not only does it reboot something from the 80s, but it literally pulls the 80s and now
Yeah,
together.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we then talk about Restoration Games, because they've done a lot of really cool shit like that.
We'll make
so why
that
don't we
our
talk about
topic.
Restoration
Okay.
Games, Dark Tower, and game testing? That sounds like a good.
That will be on the 16th, and that'll be our last show for 2023. If you can imagine
15th or
that.
16th?
The 16th.
16th. Okay. Yeah, unfortunately, I apologize. Oh yeah, next week. Yeah, I am not available next week. So we will skip that. I hate to skip the second to the last show, but this one can't be avoided, unfortunately. So yeah, I think that's a good way to round out the year, and then we're going to take some time off for some brainstorming, and come back in like the first week of January. So
or second week. I think we're thinking second week.
Second, sure.
Yeah, I think we're talking about second week.
Okay.
Because we both have a lot of family vacation stuff going on. So
okay, second week of January. So
where can we find you, Bri?
That'll give us a good amount of time to kind of up the game for season 3.
Yep.
You can thank you all. Work. By the way, thank you all for watching on VOD. If you are, thank you guys in chat.
Or if you're on Spotify, thank you for listening.
On Spotify, thank you. You're right. Thank you guys for joining us in chat as always. Very much appreciated having you on there. And you can find me at RPG&Co on the Instagrams. That's the best place to reach me. You can DM me there anytime. I love just chatting about shit. And also check out my website at playrpgandco.com for my artwork in the form mostly of apparel and stickers and swag and digital content. Some of it is mine. Quite a bit of it is Jason's, and it's really awesome. So head over there and check it out. Yeah, that's it. What about you? Where can we find you?
You can find me over at the Twitches. It's got all my abouts. Head on over to TTRPG Academy over at the Twitches. Hit the about, and you'll see all my socials there. Come join us in the Discord. And we're having fun.
Yeah, loving this. Trying to.
TPK.
Tell a story.
Play a game.
And be kind, please.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, all. Thanks for joining.